Hello everyone. I'm going to delve a little bit more into the ins and outs of actually tracing your object. I did bring in a new image this time. I brought in a Coke bottle. You can see I tried to be very symmetrical with my points just because this is obviously a symmetrical object. So basically I kind of want the points in the same spot because they're going to mimic one another. So one of the things that I suggested is make sure that you're working from bottom up. So I'm going to add a base layer, and basically this dark green that is in here with this bottle, that's what I'm going to essentially highlight first and then put all my other colors on top of that. So this way there's still a little bit of a green. I can even, if I really want to, at the very, very end, add another set of green layers that is basically just very transparent and laid on top if I really wanted to get that effect. But seeing that I kind of want like a cutout effect for this project, I'm going to just kind of lay in extra layers on top of one another. So let's get underway on how to shape your bottom layer. So obviously I went around and I already traced this. So as we said in the previous video, you can hit the node tool and switch directly over to that and then consistently move things. Now, as I'm actually tracing my object, a lot of times what I'll do is instead of switching back and forth between this pen and node and waiting until the end in order to move things to the shape like I essentially have now, I'll do some work as I am actually adding in the points. And the way you do that is basically you add in an area and then you hold the command key, and that will allow you to move things. That'll save you some time later on in editing, essentially. It'll save you some time in the sense that you won't have to go back later on after you've finished everything, essentially like I'm doing right now, and switching everything over. You can basically work on it as you're going, so this way you can see how it's going to look on one side, and then basically you kind of can just mimic that later on. It'd be even nicer if they allowed you just to copy one side to the other, but sadly we can't at this point. So, but as you see, basically I am adding in these curves around here. I'm trying my best to mimic it as much as possible. Seeing that we're going to hide away the original image eventually, you don't necessarily have to go crazy. It doesn't have to be exact. Now, there is something here that I want to show you. See how I can't get this line right here to match up perfectly? Most times I'd be like, don't worry about it, but I'm just going to click on this dot here, which is going to bring up this little arm, essentially, of the way that it's being shaped. I'm going to bring this one in, and then on the other one, I'm going to bring it out, and that will give me that little loop shape that I'm looking for. Okay, now that I have traced this and it's perfectly traced, if I hide this, notice the only thing that's there is the outline. But if I even actually click off of this, you'll notice, oh my god, my curve went away. But when I click back on the layer, it's there. The reasoning being is I have no fill and I have no stroke. What I'd like to do is I'm going to bring back this bottle and I'm going to find the deepest of the darks here. So this way, that essentially will be my base, and I'll build everything on top of that. Maybe don't want to go extremely dark, but I at least want to get close enough where it'll mimic the color of the bottle without me having to add too much difference. So I'm going to actually come up here and grab a green from the top of the bottle. I'm going to grab a little bit darker, and maybe that's not dark enough. But I can grab this and I can just kind of play with it to get that color a little different. Maybe the spot that I clicked on wasn't perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to hide this, and then what I would do is I would start building in these various layers. One thing that you could do is also add a stroke to this. So I'm going to bring this back, so this way we actually have a real outline of the bottle. I'm going to grab the move tool, make sure I'm on this. Notice that now the stroke is up here. I can add in just a little bit of a stroke if I want to. Besides for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under this pressure, and I'm going to start adding some curvature to my lines. This way it is showing that essentially I have rounded lines, because as these get closer to the edge, they are going to thicken, and as they kind of go out to the center, they should also thin out a little bit. It's just kind of the way that you would want to drawing. As I move this around, notice that the left-hand side is getting thicker versus the right-hand side. You don't necessarily want that. What we would wind up having to do is just add in a ton of these little nodes in here, and that would wind up allowing us to play with it. I don't think it's necessarily the best option for me on this one. I might just have to play around with this a bunch, just to kind of get a little bit of variety in line. So the next thing I would do is I would hide this, and I would start adding in some areas that essentially would highlight other parts of this bottle. So I'm going to really stick to the kind of dark areas and build this bottle up. So for instance, this little area here, which are the grooves of the bottle, I would start kind of just essentially making some things for that. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the background. I'm going to come up here to the stroke, and I'm going to reset this. The reason being is I want to reset it because I don't want the settings from the bottle to transfer over to what I'm doing for this area here, because I want to change it individually. So I'm going to switch over to this pen, and I'm just going to start bringing in some areas. You can see how I just kind of play with that until it works. That's the best way I can explain it to you. There's no right or wrong answer to this. You kind of just have to keep playing with it until it works. I don't want to fill on this, so I'm going to actually, since I left the fill, I'm going to go under fill and then hit none. And if I hide this, you can see how that kind of creates that line. Just be careful not to click on another one. Before you get to the next area that you want to build up, make sure that you switch to, like, say, the move tool and click off. That'll basically end that line, and so you can start building the next one. One thing I just noticed that on my bottle, essentially, this curve is underneath the base layer. I want this above the base layer, so I'm going to move that up. But you can see that that's starting to build some edges. And what I'll do is I'll continue to work on this, and then once I'm finished, I'll upload what my final project looks like, and you can kind of look around on it and see how I manipulated it in order to create the bottle. But you can look forward to that later on. Make sure you're just picking something that you can work with. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. As I'm working on this, I'm probably realizing that this is a little bit harder than I originally thought it would be for myself. But I know that as you play around with things, you'll be able to continue to build them. If you have any questions, let me know. But I just basically wanted to show you how you would manipulate this selection essentially that you were creating with your pen, and then putting in a fill and adding a stroke.